Thank you so much for joining us today for our conversation around building a culture of skilling within your not-for-profit organization. My name is Mark Spiota. I am the General Manager for Tech for Social Impact here at Microsoft. And I'd like to thank the Chronicle Philanthropy for hosting this discussion today. I'm very happy to welcome our two panelists who will be joining us today. Dr. Bessa Bauta from the Jewish Board of Children and Family Services, and Ali Schlaffer. Ali is joining us from Catholic Relief Services. So really happy to have these two leaders with us today and looking forward to getting their perspective on their strategy and approach to skilling for their organizations. Before we jump into the discussion, I did want to provide just a little bit of context on who we are. Here at Microsoft, our company mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. That is foundational for how we operate globally as an organization, as a corporation, and within our group, which is Tech for Social Impact, a part of Microsoft Philanthropies. We take this mission to heart. We consider ourselves to be on the tip of the spear for the company when it comes to making sure that we're living up to this stated mission as it relates to how we enable not-for-profit organizations around the planet. Microsoft has a long history of participating and contributing to not-for-profit efforts around the planet. If you were to take a look at some of the contributions that our efforts generate, just some statistics from last year, close to $5 billion in grants and discounted software and services provided into the not-for-profit sectors. $250 million donated by our Microsoft employees via our annual giving campaign and matching efforts. And we continue to expand our scale and scope and reach around the planet. Last year, we were very happy to reach close to 375,000 organizations globally. I'm very happy to report that as we come toward the end of this current year for ourselves, that number is actually approaching 450,000. So we're very happy with our continued expansion and participation in the sector. So again, just a little bit on us as an organization and on Tech for Social Impact in particular. With that being said, I would love to get into our discussion today. In order to get us started here, it's interesting, this topic of skilling. I think if we were to ask everyone that's on the call today to write down their own definition of skilling, we would probably get however many hundred different versions of some permutation of what skilling means. And so, let's get grounded in that before we dive into the discussion. And maybe I'll ask you both, maybe starting with you, Ali, if you could just share with us a little bit about how you think about skilling, and how Catholic Relief Services thinks about skilling.
I love this question. So happy to kind of kick this off and excited to hear what you think about it, Vesa, too. For me, skilling is really about enabling our staff and our partners to have the tools, the technology, the processes that they need to get their job done efficiently and effectively. And that means however they can, supporting the services that we provide overseas in over 90 countries. It's getting them to be enabled to do that job quickly, effectively, and safely. And what that comes down to, when I think about skilling, I think oftentimes we can reduce it to something as simple as training. But I really think it's more than that. I think it's about confidence in a given process or task, feeling enabled and capable of taking on that challenge and having it not be a challenge, hopefully, at the end of the day. And then I think there's also a component of critical thinking and responsibility that's a part of that skilling, especially when it comes to digital technology. where we want to instill responsible use of the technology that we have. We have limited resourcing, right? And so, how do we use those technologies responsibly? And also, with the advent of things like AI or just the increasing information security landscape that we're having to navigate, responsible usage becomes that much more important to have our staff be able to identify things that maybe they shouldn't interact with and use those tools safely and effectively. So to me, skilling is those two components. It's really about confidence and aptitude and building on that existing skill set, and then also providing that responsibility framework so that people feel confident in their usage and the safety of those skills.
Thank you. A whole lot of surface area there, Ali. You covered a number of facets, and we'll dig in on those in a moment. But Bessa, could you share a little perspective as well? I'm sure there's some overlap, but how do you think about it? How does the Jewish Board approach skilling for your organization?
I concur with everything that Ali said. When I look at skilling, I coach it in lifelong learning. I think that for our team is that we have different individuals at different levels when they're coming into our organization. So for us is that we're trying to ground and level set across the organization to have them understand what tools and resources we utilize, how do we utilize them, for what purpose. One of the interesting things this morning, we usually have a monthly sort of touch base, almost like an agency get together, where we talk about, what has worked well, what hasn't worked well. And one of the really interesting things was on the onboarding as far as the technology component. How do we get everybody kind of level set on the tools and resources? And how we kind of adjust with adult learning to kind of fill those knowledge gaps. When people come to us, they're at different levels. And even our current staff, I think it's always a challenge trying to learn not only the tools and the new tools that we're kind of implementing. We deployed quite a lot of features within our, Office 365 environment, and now we've added Copilot and AI features across the board, not including our EHR. So there's quite a lot of learning. So one of the important things for us is that how do we make this intuitive for our users and our staff, and how we do, I mean, as Ali talked about, how do we build it into their workflow?
Mhm.
So it's not such a heavy lift, but they're practicing as they're learning. And obviously, I second everything about the ethics and the privacy, especially in a regulated environment for us, in healthcare
Mhm.
and human services as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, a lot of that is aligned with some of the points Ali raised, and you also brought some other aspects into the discussion as well. One theme that I hear in both of your descriptions there, Ali, you started with, the tools, the technology, the process, all in support of the people. Bessa, you talked about kind of getting people grounded and level setting were the words that you used. Some of the other expressions that we hear quite often from the other organizations that we work with are things like, creating a baseline of capability across the organization, and also this theme of kind of meeting people where they are in their own personal readiness journey, their own personal enablement journey. And, with the advent of AI and the acceleration around technology kind of being infused into everything that we're doing today. Couple that with the climate that we're kind of all navigating through. While Catholic Relief Services and the Jewish Board have different missions, you both serve communities. You both are in the business of enabling others and providing for others, and having that capability, a reliable, Ali, you said confidence in their capability across your organization is really, I think, fairly critical to be able to really live up to what that mission calls for. And again, that's a theme that we hear from most of the organizations that we support. But let's dig in on that a little bit. So maybe Ali, I'll ask you, when you think about kind of the mindset or the approach that you take to skilling, organizational skilling at Catholic Relief Services, how do you infuse it into the culture? How do you ensure that individuals, regardless of where they sit in the organization, IT or in programs or wherever they may be, that they're clear and understand like what their role is in skilling for the organization and for themselves? Can you talk a little bit about Catholic Relief Services there?
Of course. I mean, to your point, especially with the landscape as it is right now, with our funding situations in the international development space, it's more critical than ever for us to be thinking this way. And so I really see digital skilling as future forward. We need it's not only digital skills, right, but it's also instilling this level of adaptability and self-learning and kind of that curiosity that we want all of our staff to have. And so what we do internally, at least at CRS, is we have capability frameworks for a variety of our different functions. I'll talk about the digital side because that's my world, but we have that for things like monitoring and evaluation and business development and other areas as well, where staff who operate in that function have a level from 1 to 5, basically from novice to expert, with career tracks that they can follow and milestones of specific capabilities that also tie in with some learning materials and curriculum.
Hmm.
And this is all self-paced opportunities to grow along that track. When it comes to the digital side, we are really focused on aligning ourselves with DigComp 2.0, which is the EU's framework for digital competencies. And so that model has everything from, information and data security all the way to problem solving your own IT problems. And we don't expect everybody to be level 5 because most jobs don't necessarily need that.
Hmm.
But what we try and do is say, hey, if you're in this role, here's where we think you should be at on that capability matrix. How can you work with your supervisor to get there? And it really is something that leadership has to be bought into as well. We believe that very strongly because you have to make time for this, right? It's something that can occur on the job. We hope that most learning is built in that way, but you also have to set aside space to kind of grow in these areas as well. And so we've aligned ourselves with that particular model. And we also host regular annual training events around digital dexterity.
Hmm.
And this is really with our global staff in mind. So we're super distributed. Oftentimes there's barriers when it comes to language or even just time zone access for some of our content and trainings. And so every summer we host a digital dexterity month, and that is across our different regions, offered in different languages to provide skilling opportunities in different tracks that have been highlighted. They differ in each region. They're targeted to what the needs are of that particular part of our organization as well. And that's been very successful. We're only on year 2 of it, but something that we're hoping to grow and continue to do for our staff in alignment with our capability framework.
Well, that's fantastic. Digital dexterity. I like that. That's a great way to think about it. Ali, you mentioned several aspects of I'll say your culture that I think are maybe key indicators of a learning culture, key indicators of a culture that fosters kind of a growth mindset for its employees and volunteers and such. You talked about adaptability. You talked about fostering curiosity, which is maybe the most critical aspect of the whole thing. Um, and the ability framework that you describe is fantastic. It really gives people kind of a clear map on how they can take accountability and ownership of their own journey in the process. One just quick follow-up question. I actually two. I know that you have taken advantage. Catholic Relief Services has taken advantage of some of the skilling that Microsoft makes available. This is specific to our Copilot AI solutions. There's got to be a sea of skilling content out there. How do you kind of discern and curate what you're going to bring forward for your folks? That's part one of the question. And part two is, in addition to all of that fostering of this learning kind of mindset, you talked about buy-in from leadership. You talked about creating time. Is there also an accountability component for the individuals, your employees? Do they have something in their managed business objectives or their annual kind of objectives that does address skilling directly?
Those are great questions. Yes, we have partnered and we are still in the midst of partnering with TSI on some targeted co-pilot training for a small cohort of our staff
Mhm.
internally that range from our field officers all the way to our CEO. So we have quite a distributed group who's participating in that training. And I think that gets to a little bit of the heart of our philosophy. when it comes especially to tech adoption or to kind of being part of the sea of options for learning opportunities that our staff are offered each
Hmm.
day, getting their attention and buy-in and having that executive presence also as part of those training opportunities is critical for us, to really validate that this is where people should be spending their time and this is where people should be investing in their own growth and development. When it comes to how we identify and select which learning opportunities are best, a lot of it comes down to partnership and alignment. So we have in this particular case, a huge alignment with Microsoft. We have for many years. That partnership, it goes beyond just the scope of this current engagement, but I think having that partner who can say, okay, here's what we're hearing from other nonprofits on how they're leveraging these tools. Here's how we can jumpstart it. So you're not starting from zero, but you're actually starting from 50% down the road because we've
Hmm.
already been working with people. Those are the things we try to prioritize when we're working with anyone external bringing in learning content to our teams. We also do a decent amount of tailored content though as well, where it's really needs to be contextualized for the services that we offer. And that's prioritized based on our agency strategy and areas that we're highlighting in terms of our health programming and our humanitarian efforts. So usually it's more in alignment with our programming focuses versus in alignment with a specific digital skill. So those tend to align with projects that we have within the scope of whatever that donor requirement might be.
Got
Uh,
it.
I feel I missed the second part of your question, so I want to make
Well,
sure.
it was really asking about how do you have you instilled a way to hold people accountable for their
Yep.
own readiness?
We do have, right now they're just an optional offering for our
Hmm.
staff. But in addition to their, standard performance review, we have optional metrics that people can add as accountability for their supervisors as well, because their supervisors have to sign off on that performance review each year and also say, hey, I enabled you to have this time to grow in this
Hmm.
skill. We have standard language and offerings for that so that people can fold that into their job goals for the year as well as their performance metrics. But it's really an opt-in process for us right
Got
now.
it.
Would love to grow that at some point further, but that's
Yeah,
where
I do think it's a journey. Even here at Microsoft, I've been here for some time, and we have absolutely kind of year on year built up that clarity and accountability for each of us as employees about what's expected in terms of our own readiness. But thank you, super helpful. Bess, I'd be curious to get your perspective. Allie talked about leadership. She talked about she mentioned her CEO. I happen to have the privilege to have met your CEO, Dr. Brennan, and I know firsthand that he's also passionate about this space. But I'm curious, how does the Jewish board look to make sure that this idea of skilling and this idea of enablement is not like an IT centric thing? How do you make sure that it is sort of organizational wide and what are some of the practices that you've seen successful in that effort?
So I'll start by saying that even though we're not a technology company, technology is a key ingredient in all of our services. From everything that we do gets tracked. The other thing that we've done internally, and I can have second what Ali said, one of the things that we've kind of built out in the last 2 years since Dr. Brenner came on board as our CEO is really bringing in a chief learning officer and developing a pretty large learning team.
Hmm.
Um, and within the healthcare space and the human services space, especially, we do quite a lot of mental health, direct services, psychiatric related services, other types of wraparound services. So the training on the clinical part is obviously really, really important. But in order for our clinicians and our physicians to do their jobs, they also have to be adept in navigating our technology systems as well. How do you navigate our EHR? How to navigate our HR applications? How do you even navigate our internet or intranet, internet, everything in between? I think we run the gamut. So one of the things that we realized fairly quickly that we're fairly strong in the area of provision of training related to clinical services and evidence-based interventions, but we really, there was a huge gap on the technology or the digital learning side. So Last summer, we partnered with our learning department to really bring in specific bespoke trainings to our users based on their level of learning, based on adult learning theory, to kind of target them where they're at and then build those skills. The other thing that we did is that we brought in a learning management system similar to what I'm very familiar with the university side, kind of allowing our workforce that's pretty much global. We have teams in Latin America, Europe, everywhere else in between, to allow them to be able to take these classes online, remotely, and kind of fill their knowledge gaps. In addition to that, there is training exercises and tests at the end to assess their level of knowledge. The other thing that we're doing, because we think is really, really important, is to have those spaces. So we've created lunch and learns where people can come in, ask questions, get additional clarification and feedback. We thought that was another area that we needed to fill knowledge gaps. I think the online and asynchronous learning, kind of offerings are great, but having a live instructor to just answer those specific, nagging questions, we thought that was also very important. The last thing that we're doing is really kind of looking at across the organization for different types of use cases, and especially technology-based use cases, and allowing individuals to play and learn and gamifying that approach as much as possible. Because otherwise, I think if it's just rotary learning, even with me, if I have an instructor just kind of, present the material, it gets very dry. But if I get to play around with the application, I get to kick the tires, I get to explore, I think our staff find it much more interesting that way. And we get to see where the knowledge gaps are, and find different ways to fill those gaps.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of similarity with regard to what Ali shared in terms of the leadership buy-in. You talked about some investments, frankly, which is a good indicator of prioritization with a learning team, with a learning management system, and there's no way that's going to happen if you don't have support and a true belief in the importance of this effort from the people that are making the decisions. So that's wonderful that Jewish Board has that support. You also talked about you mentioned gamification and creating space for people to learn. So what I mean, what I'm hearing is it's both a systems and a process thing, but it's also a cultural thing in terms of how you kind of nurture the behavior that you're looking for. One additional question, you talked about the importance of clinical training for your providers, in that you've also infused things like EHR and other systems that they're dependent upon into what they're going to be skilled on. Is that the same direction with sort of general purpose capabilities like AI? Like an EHR is very specific to their work, but are you also thinking that way about things like Copilot and other forms of AI?
Absolutely. I think the AI part is much more fun than the EHR training. I tried to make the EHR training fun. It's really not that fun.
Yeah.
Um, I think the AI part, they get to play around with, hey, look at the capabilities of note summarization. We're actually delving our toe with our Microsoft partners in the ambient AI listening for our clinicians. Our really goal and objective is that how can you use these tools within your everyday workflow, and what sort of tasks can be automated or things can fall off your, to-do list. Um, my boss loves PowerPoint, so that's his love language. And it used to take me hours and hours and hours to like create a PowerPoint. And I just love it now. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, look at all these amazing tools that are available out there. I could create PowerPoints literally in like 10, 15 minutes, like a really good one. And it covers pretty much a lot of the knowledge base, or, look back through my email, through my files. That would have taken me a long, long time to do. So things like that, productivity related aspects, and getting those use cases and showing our folks that, look, this can save you time and it's also fun. I think that's what we're trying to do. Again, there's also rotary learning that has to happen, where individuals need to understand how do these tools function? What does it look like? I thought Ali touched on the appropriate kind of ethical components, ensuring that our systems are configured appropriately. So if I search, I'm not getting all the HR related material. But once we get all of those foundations, I think the exploration part and learning part and making it fun, I think that's really important for us.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually you just kind of brought a different discussion into the table here, which is as you pointed out, Ali had referenced it earlier in the conversation, but having the right kind of AI policy for your organization that maps to the principles and the values of the organization, having the right governance in place around who gets access to what and when, having the right security, which goes well beyond AI, but also really critical. Those are, I would say, key foundational components for being able to do anything with artificial intelligence and to ensuring that that your skilling is going to be effective. We've talked about process a couple times. Bessie, you just said like your day-to-day, your everyday activities. What about change management? How have you folded change management into your approach to skilling and to the adoption of AI? Is it something that you've brought sort of a process and structure to, or is it more opportunistic? And I'll ask you that question, Bessa, and then would love to hear from Ali on it as well.
So our boss is really big into Lean Six Sigma. It's one of the requirements
There
across
you
the
go.
organization.
Yeah.
So we have a chief advancement officer that got brought in, and one of her tasks and her to-dos is really expand the project management team, look at change management across the organization, also look at what projects get implemented and how does technology fit within that framework. So one of the really key components is training the entire organization on those types of processes, the quality assurance, quality management, change management processes. So it's been interesting. I mean, I've been trained many, many years ago, primarily on the agile aspect of it. And in a way, I think it level sets the organization across the board, really thinking differently about how do you use these tools? How do you manage data? How do you incorporate these tools into practice? And what does that look like for every single individual user and staff across our organization?
Thank you. It's wonderful. I mean, between the investments that you mentioned in a learning team and LMS and adopting something as proven as Six Sigma and Lean, it sounds like you really have the right structures in place to, help your organization evolve. How about for CRS, Ali? Is it a similar approach? Do you guys have something as structured as Six Sigma and Lean as it relates to change management, or is it a little bit more ad hoc?
It depends, is what I would say. Within our IT change management, we have targeted support for all of our core systems.
Hmm.
And like I'm sure most people listening on the call, we are a nonprofit that has multiple. So we we don't just have Microsoft tools, we also have Oracle and
Hmm.
Salesforce. And those each have their own change leads, and they're in coordination in a similar way to what Bessa was describing, um, following the same kind of protocols when it comes to change, making sure that we're not inundating our end users because they're getting tired of hearing these tech updates from us
Hmm.
constantly, making sure that we're not doing the trainings at the same time, all of that good stuff. But then at a wider scale, we also have our strategic change work that's led by a change advisor on the strategy team who oversees some of our IT work and intervenes where necessary, but that work is much more long term. And so it just has a different approach. It's not as day to day when it comes to managing the change internally. What I
Got
would
it.
say is super user communities. That is our
Yeah.
bread and butter when it comes to our change management,
Hmm.
especially because we're so distributed. We've had to be really targeted about getting representatives from each of our country programs and also from each of our functional areas into super user communities to engage with us regularly around those upcoming changes so they can kind of preach and share, kind of train our trainers through that modality. That's been really
Hmm.
successful for us in the way that CRS is structured.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say that in addition to the kind of, hard infrastructure of the things that Bessa mentioned, to also have that a little bit more organic approach to fueling that culture of innovation and learning. Just when I look across the organizations that we work with, user communities, champs, again, gamification, things like badges. People love badges. They get very, very excited about being able to, put up their AI certified badge on LinkedIn or whatever it may be. So I do think all those pieces contribute to it. Um, you know, Along those same lines, when it relates to the importance of having your users bought in, and really, I would say, kind of having a listening mechanism to where is the opportunity for the innovation and the new technology that you're introducing. Well, I mentioned earlier, we work with, close to 400,000 organizations around the planet today in tech for social impact. Not all of them are using Copilot, clearly, but many of them are starting to use Copilot and starting to use different AI services. And one of the things that we're seeing very consistently is when you're looking for those ideal scenarios for digital transformation, it's really important to have both a tops down view and a bottoms up view on where that opportunity exists. And so, if a CFO is to look at their P&L, they can very clearly identify where they see opportunities for efficiencies. On the same note, the folks in the trenches, the folks in the programs that are doing that work every day, quite often we find the most accessible and most impactful use cases for AI implementation, they come from that audience. They come from people saying, "Hey, I'm spending an hour a day doing this thing. Maybe it's updating a case file, maybe it's doing a trip report. There's got to be a way that I can do this in a more efficient fashion that's going to give me time back and maybe even produce a better artifact as a result." So great to hear that you're doing that. Um, we're about halfway through our discussion. I do want to remind our viewers today, we've got a Q&A, live Q&A. So if you have any questions you'd like to make sure we address, please feel free to chat away, and we'll make sure we bring those topics up. Um, I did want to pivot in a little bit of a different direction and get some perspective from you both on, we've talked about what is skilling. We've talked about how you're infusing it into your culture internally and the way in which it's helping both Jewish Board and CRS to kind of digitally transform. Well, how do you think about skilling as it relates to your constituents and your communities? Again, very different organizations, but ultimately you're both in service of groups of people, and you both have parts of your remits include, you know, their ability to be successful in the world. I'll leave it at that high level. But how do you think about the opportunity for skilling for your constituents and your communities? And are you doing any of that today, or do you see, maybe bringing it into the equation in the future? And Bessa, maybe I could start with you on this one. Do you have any thoughts on it?
So we actually are thinking about that. We implemented pretty large telehealth project about a year and a half ago. And one thing that our technology team ran into is the client side. Obviously, how do I use my computer to log on? How do I use my phone? We ran into these issues fairly quickly in order to have an online telehealth session. It's not just our side, it's not the provider side, it's also on the patient, on the client side, that they're able to have their technology work the way that it needs to work. So we pivoted our team. I think our IT team was shocked. Our health informatics team was, a little bit overwhelmed in the beginning. We learned fairly quickly that we needed to upscale also our clients, that they needed to understand how to use this technology in order for them to access services. We also ran into quite a lot of issues with individuals, and we serve individuals with mental health as well as behavioral health issues, that it was not only the digital literacy, but access to the technology as well. So one thing that we're doing is enabling those individuals to have, cell phones, laptops, other types of equipments, including we have a domestic violence program as well, then we're gifting that to our clients to enable them to have access. Again, Jewish Board is slightly bigger, so we have a little bit more resources than many of our colleagues in the not-for-profit sector. But one of the things that we're focusing in the next year is really expanding our knowledge base, not just with IT, not just with just our staff, but also kind of allowing and encouraging our clinicians and others, because they're the touch base for our clients, empowering them to understand how do these technologies kind of fit into their life. The technology component is actually built into their goals and objectives that our clients usually you ask us, how can I be much more digitally literate? So we're building that into their case plan. We're building that into their development plan, which is a very different way of thinking that, technology can be interwoven into a treatment plan. That would have never happened, a few years ago. So it's organizational mindset that technology is here to stay. The same way I use the typewriter, and then I moved to a laptop, a computer, and then I moved to, now we're moving to AI. Those are just tools that all of us need to be adept across society, in order for us to be functioning, at our optimal level. But it's a challenge.
Absolutely. And to your point about these are tools, there's also a component of equitable access to these tools and the ability for people to be successful in the world without having that knowledge. So it's wonderful to hear that Jewish Board is already thinking through that. Just from the Microsoft side, I talked about Tech for Social Impact, and you're both aware of the investments that we're making into skilling for nonprofits themselves. We also have a very large company-wide effort around skilling through not-for-profits to their communities. And so hopefully we'll continue to work together and look at ways to bring even more knowledge to your constituents. But Ali, whereas the majority of BESA's community is kind of centrally located in New York City or New York, what your population is literally global. How has skilling and bringing value to them come into the equation for CRS, and do you see any opportunity to do that in the future?
I would say it's foundational for us, and even more so. It continues to grow as a priority area.
Mhm.
I would say there's two lanes in which CRS tends to tackle skilling for our constituents and also our participants in our programming. We have a huge focus on partnerships and capacity building. We even have a team that's dedicated globally towards that work. And that's intentional because there's a huge focus in the international development space on localization. And CRS has a long history of working through and with local partners with the idea that we want to work ourselves out of a job. That ultimately the goal is to build up local organizations to take on the work that we provide, whether that's distributing bed nets or that's providing agricultural services. We want to make sure that we're not needed after a time. And so it really is coming in more as a technical advisory role, oftentimes in our relationships with partners, to be able to provide that support. And technology is always a component of that.
Mhm.
And bringing up those skills, it's foundational to be able to interact with the partners and also to help. We're having conversations around, okay, what elements of our tech suite do you like that you would like to see in your own organization? How can we help you learn from what we did wrong and what we would wish we would have done differently in the past as you're applying it in your context? And maybe you don't need, A through Z of what we have, but we can get you A through G. And those are the conversations we're having with our partners. I'll also say we have a team that's focused on what we call ICT4D, which is Information Communication Technology for Development. And that team partners specifically with our projects and our programming teams to deliver technology services that are providing, life-saving support on the ground, whether that's cash and voucher assistance for people
Mhm.
who are fleeing conflict zones, or as I mentioned, malaria treatment and tracking of health posts and systems or inventories that we need to manage. All of these things are enabled by and through technology, and that can be as simple as applications on a phone. We find that a lot of times communities, if anybody's going to have technology, it's going to be through a phone or a mobile device, and we reach a lot of people that way. And if they don't have a phone, we find a way to get them one so that they can engage with our programming longer term and also have access to those learning resources after the life of the project, so that it's not just one training and we're out of there, but that those resources live on in a digital format as well.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, first of all, it's amazing that Catholic Relief Services provides that to the communities that you serve, and also that that you see it as a critical aspect of the value that you bring. One of the things that I wanted to also get some perspective from you both on is, with the kind of the changing global poly crisis is how I've heard people referring to it lately. The challenges that we're all kind of facing at this moment. Catholic Relief Services. This is publicly available information, but one of the most significantly impacted organizations by the changes with the USAID. And I know that that's been very disruptive for you all and your ability to provide the services that you do. Um, the Jewish board maybe not as directly dependent on federal funding, but certainly dependent on state and local funding, and probably implications either coming or here already are coming for you as well over time, Bessa. I think about how skilling can sometimes be perceived as a nice to have rather than a necessity, and I'm curious, based on what you know now. Do you see your organizations decreasing focus on skilling, increasing focus on skilling, staying consistent, and why? Would love to get some perspective from you both on that. I'll go with you first, Sally. Sorry.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'll be honest, we're still in the middle of it right now.
Hmm.
And I'm sure other folks on the call who are listening can relate. Um, it's been a hard year. There's been a lot of changes coming our way, and I think we're still navigating what does CRS look like in 2026, and how are we going to need to adapt to a donor landscape that might not involve that funding source, candidly, or that might, that relationship might look quite different.
Yeah.
Um, and, we hope that that's not the case. And we continue to work and advocate for that. But I think internally, the conversation is less about do we cut those skilling initiatives, or are those the first things to go? It's more narrowing the scope.
Hmm.
As we envision the CRS of the future, what are the skills that we're going to need to see us through? What are the skills that are critical to helping us adapt and grow? And on the digital side, it really is starting to look like an increased focus. This is probably not surprising to anybody, but automation,
Hmm.
apps, AI focuses on areas where we can improve efficiency through those available tools that we have in our
Yeah.
wheelhouse, and finding ways to get those to everybody where we can, so that people are upskilling and developing as well, even in this period of transition. That's why we've been, prioritizing these trainings with TSI as well. Not only is it something that's boosting the skills of our staff and putting us a little bit future forward, but I also think it's nice to have something to look forward to in this time when everything else feels a little bit chaotic. It's actually been a great motivator for myself and for the people participating to have something where it feels like, hey, I'm advancing my token a little bit, and I'm preparing myself for what's to come. These skills are super transferable. So I think part of it's also just keeping that good morale and momentum is critical, and having skill building is a foundation of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm smiling because that sentiment that you just shared around what we're seeing in the skilling that we're doing specifically around AI is that of course we do user surveys and that sort of thing, and a very very consistent theme is kind of thank you for the investment in me. And I do think that people want to make sure that they're continuing to develop themselves and continuing to add skills that, as you said, are super transferable for the future. A couple other themes that you called out that I also think are, from our vantage point, very widely held right now. This idea of narrowing the scope. Like if we're going to be in a situation where our funding is impacted, and unfortunately that means we're going to be working with less employees, we need to make sure that those individuals have the right tools, have the right processes, have the right enablement to really be efficient and effective in that effort. And certainly, there are aspects to that like automation that have direct positive financial implications as well. So it's great to hear that that CRS is keeping that kind of core. And as you said, let's wait and see what happens in terms of what that looks like for you all in the future. But glad to hear that the importance is recognized. Yeah. Bessa, how about for you? Just to recap, the question was really about, how are you thinking about this focus on skilling with the changing landscape? And do you imagine that the Jewish board will kind of increase, decrease, or stay the same in terms of the prioritization and investment?
I think for us is that, as Ali mentioned, it's nice to have something that's a little bit stable that people can count on, where everything else is like shifting sands, that at least for our staff, they know that these programs are going to stay, that we're adding, thanks to our partnership with Microsoft and a few others, that knowledge base will continue along with supporting our staff to be able to provide the services at the utmost, the best level. It is a
Hmm.
privilege to work even with our clients. It's a privilege to be, in their community. So we want to ensure that our staff have the skills and expertise to be able to provide the utmost care to the communities that we serve. Um, there's a lot of changes. We are very aware of those changes. I think for us as an organization, we do have funding from the federal to the state as well as city. It's really kind of staying the course, and you could only control what you could control. I think as an organization, we're trying to do that. Um, Kind of doubling down and ensuring that we're providing the best service to our staff, and then building the skilling for our staff as well. These skills, I think, are going to be much more important. Having AI skill, digital literacy skills, they're not going to go away. It's just accelerating. And I also want to echo what Ali said. We're looking at process efficiencies. So there's different ways for, as an organization, for us to function. Process efficiency are, one area that we're looking at. So we're looking at what can we automate. We use Power Automate as one of the products. We have many others. And we're also looking at the agentic piece. What can we take away from our staff? So then the services that we're providing can be multi-services rather than just one, because our staff will have the ability to do different types of services or service mix rather than doing a lot of the administrative components. So looking at the way to reduce some of our administrative burdens, and adopting technology as a way to save time, to save energy, and as well as to save resources. Again, that all depends on implementation, that depends on support, and continued organizational support. So I think for us is really staying the course, staying steady, and also being mindful of what's happening around us as well. It's
Yeah.
also important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know who to credit this to, but there's like the old adage about, I'm too busy to get organized. I'm thinking about that as you all are describing kind of the importance of making sure that you're continuing to have some degree of focus on that enablement piece so that your people can be successful in their efforts. You mentioned agents as well, Bessa, and that's an area where and it's amazing how fast things move with AI. 6 months ago, the idea of agents on the horizon was an intriguing thing that we had lots of questions about, a lot of curiosity. Fast forward now, even in spite of everything that's happening in the world, or maybe because of what's happening in the world, we're beyond tire kicking. We many of the organizations that we work with are very rapidly embracing, understanding how to apply agents into their environment. And the good news there is that it is a very accessible technology. It's not a large dollar investment. And if you have the right skilling in place, you can start to implement agents literally in a matter of days in most scenarios. So great to hear that that's on your radar as well. Um, well, we got a little bit of time left. We are approaching the top of the hour. I did just want to give you all both a little bit of space and in case there's anything that we haven't covered yet that you think would be important or compelling for the folks that are joining us today. And I guess I'll frame it up around, if you were going to leave our discussion today with one piece of sage advice, one thing to encourage people to think about or do, what might that be? And maybe we'll start with you, Bess, on this one.
I think for us is really creating a culture of learning, cultural prototyping. I want to enable every one of our staff to be able to use these tools to build their own agents, to figure out how can these technologies help them with their workflow. I can't be everywhere. Um, and for me, it's really important that I'm able to upskill, that I'm able to give these tools, put them at the hands of our staff, our clinicians, our frontline staff, and have them, think through, how can I bring this into my job? How can I make my job easier with these tools? So my goal is really to create an environment of learning, create an environment of experimentation. Even tell my IT staff, you're not going to break anything. I made sure that you're not. So this is a good sandbox for you to play, to learn, to develop. Um, and then think about the ways that we could support you in your work. So, I mean, the goal would be that I would encourage everybody to create an environment of experimentation, learning, and allowing the people to actually, and your staff, to learn by doing. That's the most important thing. I think it's when it's theory, it's great, but it's best when our staff, including my students, learn by actually doing and the practicality of it.
Absolutely. And, that aligns well with what Allie had said earlier about, fostering a culture of curiosity. Nobody used this term, but the prospect of like failing fast or creating an environment in which people are, feel empowered to take some risk and to try things and see what works. All, I think, critical aspects to advance these sort of efforts forward. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Bessa. How about for you, Allie? Any parting words of wisdom?
Well, to echo what Bessa said, I was going to say, regardless of size, if you're a nonprofit looking at kind of starting your skilling journey or advancing your skilling journey, I do feel like communities, in particular super user communities or communities of practice, are a really tangible, practical way to get started, especially if you can get them off the ground with a few interested people. It's not something that you have to like maintain a ton of effort in, because there's other people who are going to be contributing and putting forward their thoughts and engaging in those community spaces. I think the key with successful communities that I found is incentivizing them to stay. And especially when it comes to digital skills, if you can give them a taste of the latest and greatest a little bit earlier than some of the other folks, if you can involve them in your testing, if you can pull those people in so that they can offer you their feedback as you're rolling out whatever that new thing is, if they can be on that kind of front line for you as part of that super user journey, that has been super successful for us. And that was something that we implemented kind of day one and continues to be one of the best modalities we have. So I think that's something that anybody could instill today. And whether it's agents or whatever you're trying to implement, those communities can really be at the front of adopting those new technologies.
Fantastic. I love it. And that also maps back to Best's theme about making sure that people can have a hands-on experience, that they have the ability to really kind of seek out where these tools are going to be intriguing to them and to bring them value. So um thank you. Thank you both for making the time. Well, first of all, for being fantastic leaders for your organizations and for having some passion in this space. Secondarily, for making time to join us today and to have this discussion. We really appreciate the partnership that both of your organizations have with Microsoft, and super excited to be continuing to work for in the future with both of you. I also want to just thank anybody that joined us today. Thank you very much for participating and taking time out of your day. Hope that you got something valuable out of the discussion. We do have a couple of links that I think we'll share here momentarily if you're interested in getting any more information as it relates to Tech for Social Impact, the not-for-profit grants that Microsoft offers, and the resources that we make available. Please feel free to reach out. And then lastly, I'll just thank the Chronicle of Philanthropy for hosting this discussion today. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.